The second phone started vibrating at 6:14 in the evening, inside our family SUV, in the middle of the parking lot at Westerville Middle School, while I was bent over digging through the space between the two front seats looking for the lipstick I'd lost the week before. Outside, there was that thin kind of early November Ohio rain that left the windows coated in a dull silver haze and stretched the parking lot lights into watery streaks. My daughter, Sophie, was in the back seat, texting and grumbling that choir rehearsal had gone on way too long, while my 10-year-old son, Caleb, had already drifted off, his head tilted to one side, his basketball shoes still dusted with dirt and resting against the edge of the seat. I reached into the familiar mess inside the console. Crumpled tissues, quarters, a few hair clips, a pack of gum gone soft, a gas station receipt, a bank pen, and then my hand touched something flat, cold, and far too familiar in shape to be mistaken. I pulled it out, a phone. Black, no case, no sticker. Not mine, and definitely not the phone my husband always left on the kitchen counter every night when he came home. In that exact moment, before I even turned the screen on, I felt something cold run from the back of my neck all the way down my spine. Not the kind of cold that crashes over you like lightning in a movie. Smaller than that, sharper, more subtle, like someone had just opened a door behind you, in a house you thought had been sealed tight for years. "Did you find your red lipstick, Mom?" Sophie asked without looking up from her screen. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the thing in my hand for one more second, long enough to feel my heart stumble out of rhythm, and then I pressed the power button. The screen lit up instantly. No lock, no passcode, no nature wallpaper, no family photo, no baseball team, no car, nothing ordinary and forgettable. Just a picture of a little girl, maybe 4 years old, brown hair tied into two bunches, smiling with a gap-toothed little grin in front of a pink birthday cake. She wasn't Sophie as a toddler. She wasn't some niece from my husband's side or mine. She wasn't a coworker's daughter. She wasn't any child who had any reason to be sitting right in the center of a secret phone, hidden in my husband's car. Then the message appeared right there on the screen. I didn't have to open anything. I didn't have to search. Just one short line, but enough to change the temperature of my entire world. "Don't forget Lily's inhaler tonight. She cried after you left this morning." The sender was a name I had never heard before. Nora. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, the phone in my hand, the rain tapping against the glass, the brake lights of the minivan in front of me casting the whole cabin red. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe only a few seconds, maybe a full minute. But in that stretch of time, I understood something by instinct before logic had the chance to catch up. This was not a wrong number text. It was not some stupid joke, and worse than anything I could have imagined in that first moment, this was probably not just an affair. My name is Rebecca Hale. I'm 43 years old. I live in the suburbs of Westerville, just north of Columbus, Ohio, in a 2-story cream-colored house with blue-gray shutters, a small front porch, 2 old maple trees in the yard, and a mailbox I still hang seasonal wreaths on even though, a lot of the time, I know the whole thing is a little ridiculous. I'm the kind of woman you probably wouldn't remember for long if you met me in real life. Not because there's nothing remarkable about me, but because I belong to a very familiar shape in the American middle-class picture. The suburban mother who always knows which day her kid has practice, how many eggs are left in the fridge, which house in class needs a casserole because someone just had a baby, and which child on her son's team is allergic to peanuts. I used to work full-time as an academic counselor at a high school before I cut my hours back after Caleb was born. Now I work part-time in a student support office 3 mornings a week, and the rest of my life is filled with dinners, laundry, dentist appointments, parent groups, practice schedules, grocery runs, homework, and all the small invisible things that are somehow the backbone of a family. My husband's name is Andrew Hale. He's 45. He's a regional director for a medical imaging company, which means that for all 12 years of our marriage, he has always been traveling. Louisville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, sometimes Chicago. When we were first married, if he was gone for 2 days, I missed him badly enough that I couldn't sleep right. Later on, those trips became part of the structure of our life. The way Caleb hating broccoli became part of our life. Or the way Sophie always leaves half-finished glasses of water on her nightstand. We have 2 children. Sophie, 14, who plays cello and pouts exactly the way I did at that age, and has that look in her eyes that's both smart and mildly irritated all at once. And Caleb, 10, who loves basketball, Legos, and anything with wheels that can make a loud noise. If you looked at our family from the outside, you'd see everything people usually mean when they use the word stable. A husband who earns well, a decent wife, 2 good kids, a house that's taken care of, Sunday dinners with a small candle burning in the middle of the table, Thanksgiving at Grandma's house, Christmas lights out front, a week-long vacation in Michigan every summer, a family picture taken at the apple orchard in October, the 4 of us smiling under golden leaves as if pain were something that only happened to other people. I met Andrew when I was 29. In the self-help section of a Barnes and Noble near Easton Town Center. It sounds like a ridiculous story out of some commercial novel, I know. But it's true. It was bitterly cold that day. The kind of Ohio cold in February that slices right through your coat. And I ducked into the bookstore to wait for the wind to die down before driving home. Andrew was standing at the cafe counter holding a black Americano and a book about team leadership. I remember thinking he looked almost too serious. Like the kind of man who would sort his cash in his wallet by denomination and know the exact day his oil change was due. I didn't get struck by lightning. I didn't think, that's the man I'm going to marry. The feeling was quieter than that, more like seeing a warm place after a long day. He offered to buy me coffee after hearing me complain to the cashier that the roads were too slick to drive home yet. We sat and talked for an hour and a half about completely ordinary things. Parents getting older, work in your 30s, housing prices going up, the way middle-aged men act weirdly confident about grilling as if it were some inherited talent. Andrew made me laugh, not the kind of laugh that bursts out loud, the kind that makes your shoulders relax. What made me love Andrew wasn't grand gestures. He wasn't the kind of man who would hire violinists under a balcony or surprise me with tickets to Paris. He was the kind of man who remembered I didn't like green onions in chili, who left Tylenol on the counter when I had a headache, who texted, "Text me when you get there," without making it sound like control. When my mother slipped and broke her wrist in the second year we were together, Andrew drove through a hailstorm to pick her up from the hospital and stayed to install a new grab bar in her bathroom. When Sophie was born almost 3 weeks early, Andrew stood in the NICU with red eyes and shaking hands like a college kid in over his head. He held our daughter, looked up at me, and said, "We did it." In those early years, I loved him in a grown-up, practical, trusting way. I didn't love him because he made my heart race wildly. I loved him because he made me believe I could rest my back against this life and not always have to watch the exits. We got married in September in a small stone chapel in New Albany, when the trees were just starting to turn gold, and people still hoped that autumn would stretch itself out a little longer that year. I wore a simple white dress that made my mother cry the second she saw me in it. Andrew stood at the end of the aisle in a tuxedo that didn't quite suit the frame of a man who looked more natural in work shirts, and his eyes went red the moment I stepped inside. I held on to that moment for years like a smooth stone in my palm. Every time marriage grew dull or routine, I used to think, a man who cried when he saw me walk toward him at the altar must have loved me in some real way. Later, I learned that one sincere moment does not guarantee a lifetime of honesty. A person can truly love you at one point in time and still become the one who betrays you before you ever see it coming. Painfully, those two things do not cancel each other out. The 14 years of our marriage were filled with things that were so American, so ordinary, so easy to trust. Saturday mornings at Costco, where Andrew always complained that I bought too much paper towel, but would be the first one sneaking extra rolls out of the pantry by the middle of the month. Sunday football on TV, while I folded laundry and Caleb spread an entire Lego army across the living room floor. Fall weekends driving the kids out to pick pumpkins and apples, and Andrew grumbling all the way home because I always bought too many cider donuts. Thanksgiving at his parents' house in Dublin, where my mother-in-law acted every year like she was feeding an entire football team. Christmas lights out front, arguing over whether the house should smell like pine candles or cinnamon. Summer grilling in the backyard, an old Bluetooth speaker playing Luke Combs quietly, the sound of the neighbor's lawn mower drifting over the fence. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling. We weren't wildly romantic, but we weren't cold either. We were the kind of couple other people would glance at and think, yeah, that house is doing okay. And maybe that sense of okay was what lulled me into sleeping more deeply than any sweet words ever could. The first cracks, if I look back now, started much earlier than I admitted to myself, but at the time they were so small I couldn't name them. Andrew became more careful with his phone, not in some ridiculous teenage way, not staring at it all day or smiling to himself like an idiot. Just small things. He started taking it into the bathroom more often, started setting it face down on the dinner table more often, started carrying it with him when he walked out to the trash bins at the end of the driveway. I noticed, but I let it go. Everybody does that now. Then there were the work trips that seemed to run longer than they should have. Gas receipts from places that didn't match where he said he'd been. A strange soap smell on the collar of his shirt after coming back from Indianapolis. Not the body wash we used at home. I asked, he laughed. The hotel probably changed their amenities. I believed him. Some people wear the role of devoted husband so well that every odd detail gets wrapped up automatically in a reasonable explanation. And some wives, like me, have spent so many years protecting the happiness of their families that they are willing to press their own alarm bells quiet before they ring too loudly. A year before I found the second phone, there was one night Sophie was practicing cello in the living room while Andrew sat at the kitchen island answering email. I walked past him to get the salad bowl and caught the flick of his hand as he locked his screen faster than usual. Got secrets, I teased. Andrew smiled and kissed my cheek. If you saw the pile of pointless emails I get, you'd fall asleep instantly. I laughed too. Back then, it really was a harmless joke. Now, when I think back on it, I understand something terrible about deception. It doesn't blind you completely. It lets you see suspicious things, and then tempts you into choosing the softest interpretation because the truth staring back at you is too big, too sharp, too capable of ruining everything. The night I found the second phone, I still didn't open it the second I got home. I reheated meatloaf, checked Sophie's algebra, searched for Caleb's missing sock, put fresh water in the flowers my mother-in-law had brought over, signed the permission slip for the museum trip, washed a pot that didn't even need washing yet. I did every meaningless thing I could think of just to delay the moment I would have to sit down with the object lying in my purse. Andrew came home just before 7, like any other night, set his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, kissed the top of Sophie's head, asked Caleb how practice went, then looked at me and said, "You okay? You look tired." I remember standing there in the kitchen, one hand on the spoon, the other braced on the stone countertop, and for the first time feeling like I was looking at an actor who was astonishingly good at playing my husband. Not because he looked guilty. The opposite. He looked too normal, too perfectly fitted to the role, and that was what made my skin go cold. After the kids were asleep, I took the phone downstairs to the laundry room. It was the only room in the house private enough at that hour for me to sit without being interrupted. I perched on top of the dryer, the white light pouring down across my knees, listening to the low hum of the air system in the walls and the rain tapping softly against the tiny window. I pressed the screen awake, and all the details I mentioned at the beginning came back at once. The little girl with the pink birthday cake, the message about the inhaler, the name Nora, the line about her crying after he left that morning. I opened the messages. The thread with Nora was already right there, the most recent one. No password, no final layer of protection. Or maybe Andrew had simply never believed I would be the one to find. The first lines were painfully ordinary. Too ordinary. Can you stop at Kroger and grab Lily's yogurt? The strawberry one, not peach. She wants you to come Thursday for the parent-teacher thing. Don't say yes if you can't make it. Did you pay the daycare transfer? I scrolled higher and my stomach went cold. There were pictures of a little brown-haired girl in a yellow raincoat jumping into puddles. Pictures of Andrew sitting on the floor connecting wooden train tracks with her. A small breakfast table with bear-shaped pancakes and 2 pink plastic cups. Halloween pictures, the girl dressed as a mermaid, Andrew holding the handle of her pumpkin bucket. A pediatrician appointment, a dance recital, a reminder to pick up cough medicine, and then a message, "Daddy will be home Thursday, baby. Promise." I read the word daddy and felt like my heart had turned over inside my chest. I kept scrolling. Bills, an internet payment confirmation for an address in Carmel. No, not Carmel. Hilliard on the other side of Columbus. A townhouse. Electric bills, daycare bills, an email confirming a family mini-session in the park in October. A photo of a Christmas tree from the year before with 3 stockings hanging from the mantel. Nora asterisk, Lily asterisk asterisk, and Drew asterisk asterisk. Drew, that's what Andrew called himself there. Not with me, not with coworkers. There he was, Drew. In less than 10 minutes, I understood what I had not even dared to name at first. This wasn't an affair. This was a second life, not just another woman A child, a schedule. Rent, groceries, daycare, doctors, Halloween, Christmas stocking. The sort of details that only exist when a man isn't just slipping sideways into someone else's life for sex, but actually living inside. I looked at picture after picture and understood that my husband had not merely snuck off to sleep with someone else. He had another role, another address, another toothbrush, another story, a little girl who called him daddy. There is one exchange in those messages I still remember word for word. Nora wrote, "Sometimes I hate that I still have to share you with that old part of your life." Andrew answered, just a little longer, "I'm trying to do this carefully. Rebecca doesn't handle change well, and the kids are still young." When I read that, it felt like someone had taken the edge of a metal spoon and dug it straight into my sternum. Not because he was cheating, but because in that version of the world I had become that old part of your life. Something old, something that had to be managed carefully, a logistical complication, a character in the plan he was building to leave his real life. I didn't cry right away. That was what frightened me most about that night. I took screenshots, sent them to my personal email, airdropped them to my laptop, saved the photos, the bills, the calendar entries, everything. I worked like an accountant rescuing ledgers out of a burning office. Sometimes I had to set the phone down just to breathe. Sometimes my hands shook so hard I had to pin the phone between my knees. But I kept going, because in that moment, some cold instinct inside me understood that if my life was about to explode, I needed to hold on to the truth before anyone, especially Andrew, had a chance to reshape it into something smaller. When Andrew got into bed at 11 and turned his back to me like he always did, I still lay there stiff and awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. At one point, he rolled halfway toward me out of habit, rested a hand on my hip, and mumbled, "You still up?" I swallowed whatever was stuck in my throat. "Not sleepy yet. Don't stay up too late," he said, and within minutes his breathing had gone slow and even. And that, more than anything, was what made him feel monstrous to me. He could still lie beside me, speak in my husband's voice, touch me with my husband's hand, after kissing another child goodnight in another house in the very same week. Betrayers do not step out of the faces of the people you love. They wear those faces the whole time, and that is why it hurts more deeply than any shouting ever could. The next morning, Andrew kissed my forehead, reminded me to sign Caleb's field trip form, and told me not to forget Sophie's concert shoes on Tuesday night. I nodded, gripping my coffee mug so tightly the heat stung my palm. The second the door closed behind him, I called a lawyer. Not my mother, not my best friend, not my sister, a lawyer. I think it was some survival reflex. The moment you discover the man sleeping beside you has been living two separate lives, you understand this is no longer just a marital fight. It is a collapse with paperwork. My lawyer's name was Andrea Lawson. Her office was on the 8th floor of an old brick building in downtown Columbus that had been renovated into offices. The hallway smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer paper. Andrea was in her 40s, short-haired, low-voiced, with the kind of eyes that never got distracted. She listened without interrupting, only writing a few notes now and then. I told the story like someone giving a statement at the scene of her own accident. When I got to the part about the child, Andrea looked up for the first time. "A child," I nodded. "A little girl, maybe 4. Andrea sat very still for a few seconds, then said calmly, "Rebecca, the first thing you do now is absolutely nothing visible." "I have to go home tonight," I said. "I have to look at his face. I have to set the dinner table. How am I supposed to pretend?" "By remembering you need the truth more than you need the explosion," she said. "Do you want to collapse right now, or do you want to protect your children first?" That sentence kept me sitting up straight. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. I was still the mother making pancakes on Sunday morning, still driving Caleb to practice, still buying poster board for Sophie's project. And at the same time, I was the woman piecing together my husband's hidden map. I matched his travel calendar against the bills on the phone. I checked our shared accounts and found a recurring transfer into a savings account I had never seen. I compared hotel booking emails to the dates. Nora had taken pictures of Andrew and Lily at the Columbus Zoo. There were nights he had been at Sophie's recital at 7, and then sent Lily a pancake picture the next morning. Weekends when he took Caleb to a basketball game Saturday morning and then drove to the townhouse Saturday night because a client's flight got delayed. One Christmas week last year, while I thought he was in Cincinnati finalizing a hospital contract, he had actually been helping Lily decorate a second tree. I found the townhouse address. It wasn't far, just 40 minutes from our house. That hurt in a new way. If it had been in another state, Maybe I could have thought of it as some distant parallel life, but it was within the radius of an ordinary grocery run. A second life close enough that I might have driven past it by accident and never known. I also found an old pregnancy test photo. The file name was simple, June 2019. I looked at those two pink lines and felt like someone had closed a fist around my heart and squeezed. Lily wasn't the child of one terrible mistake. She was the child of a long chain of decisions. Enough decisions to become a life. And if I had never found that phone, Andrew might have kept going year after year between two houses, two sets of sheets, two dinner tables, two roles. On the third day after I found it, I texted Nora, not from Andrew's secret phone, from mine. I wrote, "Hi, you don't know me. My name is Rebecca Hale. I think we need to talk about Andrew. Please don't ignore this." Nora didn't answer for nearly 5 hours. Those 5 hours felt like winter. I still drove Sophie to rehearsal, still answered school emails, still folded towels, but my mind hung over one single point. Finally, she wrote back, "Who is this?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing, "I'm his wife." There were exactly 10 minutes of silence. Then the phone rang. I stepped out into the backyard to answer. The grass was wet. The air was cold. Somewhere in the distance, a leaf blower whined from a neighbor's yard. There was a long silence on the line. Then a woman's voice, younger than mine and gone raw with shock, said, "This isn't funny." "I wish it were a joke," I said. That one sentence was enough. I heard her breathing change, heard a little child call, "Mommy," somewhere away from the phone, and then Nora whispered, "No. No, he told me." That unfinished sentence hurt more than almost anything else. We met 2 days later at a Panera near Hilliard, about 10 minutes from the townhouse. I got there early and sat by the window watching people come in and out, carrying bowls of soup and sandwiches. A small, stupid part of me still hoped this was somehow a misunderstanding, that Nora would walk in and turn out to be tied to Andrew in some other way. Bad, maybe, but not hell. But then she walked in holding Lily's hand, and whatever hope I still had died on the spot. Nora was small, with light brown hair, an oatmeal-colored sweater, jeans, and dark circles under her eyes like somebody who had been sleeping badly for a long time. She didn't look like a homewrecker out of some television drama. She looked like 100 American women I've seen in coffee shops and grocery stores and pickup lines. Working, parenting, trying, exhausted, hopeful, trusting. Lily walked beside her in a pink coat, clutching a stuffed rabbit in one hand and her mother's fingers in the other. And the moment that little girl looked up at me, I saw Andrew's eyes. Not a vague resemblance, not maybe, the exact same eyes. I pulled out my phone and showed Nora my wedding picture with Andrew. Sophie's newborn hospital photo. Caleb sitting on Andrew's shoulders at the county fair last year. I barely had to say anything. The pictures did the work on their own. I watched Nora's face drain white one image at a time. "He told me he was divorced," she said, her mouth trembling. "He said the marriage ended years ago. He said he only stayed financially tied because of the kids." I gave a laugh with no humor in it. "He told me he had too much work." Then we both went quiet. Sometimes your own pain becomes easier to hear when somebody else reflects it back to you. Nora told me they met in 2018 at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. Andrew said he had been separated for a long time, trapped in a drawn-out legal situation because of assets and 2 minor children. He said he didn't want drama, so he kept a townhouse in Hilliard to make work easier. He went there regularly from Wednesday through Friday morning, and sometimes extra weekends if the kids were at grandma's. He attended Lily's preschool orientation, took her for vaccines, stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling, bought a used rocking chair because Lily only slept if someone sat near her. He called her Peanut. She had called him Daddy since she was barely 2. There were Christmas pictures, Halloween pictures, zoo trips, pumpkin patches, and beach weekends in Michigan I had never seen, all featuring a version of Andrew who looked exactly like the man I knew, except that his smile was turned toward another house. At one point, Lily spilled her chocolate milk across the table. By pure reflex, Nora and I both lunged for napkins at the same time. It was the strangest moment. 2 women who had just found out they'd been lied to by the same man, both kneeling over a sticky spill in a Panera, as if the world around us had not already exploded. Lily looked at me, tilted her head, and asked, "Are you Daddy's friend?" I had to turn away because if I hadn't, I would have cried right there in front of her. After that meeting, Nora and I started texting each other like 2 survivors clinging to the same piece of driftwood after a shipwreck. Not because we cared about each other immediately, but because nobody else on Earth could understand exactly how grotesque this situation was. We compared schedules, bills, trips, holidays, and the picture only got worse. There were nights Andrew had been at Sophie's recital at 7, flowers in hand, family photos in the parking lot, then driven straight to Hilliard to sleep at the townhouse. There were afternoons he took Caleb to the dentist, came home, ate dinner with us, and then texted Nora at 10:47 p.m. I miss my girls. There were evenings he sent me a picture of the sunset over the highway with almost home, and 13 minutes later sent the exact same sky to Nora with wish you were in the passenger seat. That was what chilled me most. Not just the cheating, the efficiency, the way he recycled images, words, emotions, like a good manager rotating shifts. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted the cut to be clean, and because we were heading into June, an idea began to take shape in my head. Cold, sharp, terrifyingly clear. Father's Day, every year I hosted a little barbecue in the backyard for Andrew. His parents came, my sister came, the kids made cards. Andrew stood at the grill, hugged the children, smiled for pictures, and I posted one online with some caption like, "We're lucky to have you." That year, I decided I would do the same thing. With one difference, I would let both of Andrew's lives show up in the same afternoon. Is that cruel? Yes, but by that point I was past worrying about whether I seemed cruel. For years, Andrew had lived 2 lives off the back of other people's silence and kindness. I didn't want to lend him another ounce of either. I told Nora my plan over the phone. She was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she asked, "Will the children be there?" I closed my eyes. That was the part that hurt most. I'll get Sophie and Caleb inside before it all blows up. I promise. Nora exhaled, the exhausted breath of someone who is already emptied out but still has to keep moving. Okay, she said. If this ends, it should end in the truth. I prepared for more than a week. Photos, texts, bills, daycare schedules, the Christmas stockings from the townhouse, my own family pictures, a slideshow on my laptop, a backup USB, copies of the evidence for Andrea, copies for Nora. I prepared the way somebody might prepare for the funeral of her old life. At the same time, I still bought hamburger buns, chose meat for the grill, reminded Sophie not to forget her Father's Day card, and took Caleb to pick out the gift he wanted for his dad. A little grilling tool with a wooden handle he was convinced Dad will absolutely love. Every one of those moments sliced into me, but each one also made me surer. Andrew hadn't just betrayed me, he had betrayed the 2 children, still making him cards with full, innocent trust. Father's Day morning was offensively beautiful. Blue sky, soft white clouds, fresh-cut grass. Andrew slept late, came downstairs with his hair messy, and smiled when the kids ran at him with their homemade cards. Sophie had made one with a cello on the front that read, "To the best dad, even when you're annoying." Caleb drew him as a superhero, holding a spatula. Andrew pulled both kids into his arms, laughing, kissing the tops of their heads, while I stood at the coffee maker pouring coffee with hands so cold they didn't feel like mine. Some of the most painful moments don't come when you discover the truth. They come when you watch a liar receive love he does not deserve from the most innocent people in the room. By noon, the backyard was thick with the smell of grilled meat, laughter, and the hollow thump of a basketball in the driveway. Andrew's parents came early. My mother-in-law brought potato salad. My sister Marcy brought brownies. Sophie set up a playlist of old soft rock, because Andrew liked to think he had a whole personality built around classic music and backyard grilling. Caleb and his cousins ran around with water guns. Andrew stood at the grill in a navy polo, like a desperate advertisement for the American family man. He laughed with his father, argued baseball with my brother-in-law, ruffled Caleb's hair, kissed my shoulder when he passed me. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have thought it was a peaceful day. I told Nora to come at 3:20. After we'd eaten, before pie, I had already told Sophie and Caleb that around 3:30, I'd need them inside the house to bring me an old box of family photos for a surprise slideshow for their dad. They were thrilled. Kids love anything that sounds like a surprise. At exactly 3:17, my phone buzzed. A text from Nora, "We're outside." I took one deep breath, looked out over my own backyard. My in-laws, my sister, my brother-in-law, the kids, Andrew beside the picnic table with a beer in his hand, sunlight flashing on his sunglasses, and walked to the side gate. Nora was standing there, holding Lily's hand. Lily wore a pale yellow floral dress and white sandals, with a butterfly clip in her hair. In any other context, I might have thought she looked adorable. Nora wore an olive midi dress, her face almost colorless. "Ready?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just gave the smallest nod. I led them through the side gate into the backyard, just as Sophie and Caleb ran into the house to fetch the photo box. Conversation stopped almost at once. There's a change in the air when people realize someone unfamiliar has walked into a family gathering. Andrew turned first. I will remember his face in that instant for the rest of my life. The color drained out of it so fast it was almost visible. The beer in his hand lowered halfway and then froze. His eyes moved from me to Nora, then down to Lily, then back to me. His whole body went still. "Rebecca," he said, his voice dry and wrong. "What are you doing?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Giving you the Father's Day you actually earned." No one moved. My mother-in-law looked from me to Nora, then to Lily, and I saw a very specific kind of fear pass across her face before she understood anything. My sister sat up straighter. My father-in-law frowned. My brother-in-law looked at Andrew with the expression of someone who didn't understand yet, but knew there was a problem. Lily stood close to her mother's leg, looking around my backyard like a little bird dropped into the wrong nest. Andrew stepped toward us. "Not here," he said quietly, as if lowering his voice might somehow contain the nightmare. "Rebecca, not here." I laughed short and cold. "You've been living two lives long enough, Andrew. I think it's time they met." Then I turned to my in-laws, my voice so calm it sounded foreign even to me. "I think you should meet Nora and Lily." My mother-in-law's lips parted. "Rebecca," and I said, "I think you should know Andrew has been living with them for years." There was 1 second of total silence, a kind of silence where you can suddenly hear the wind in the leaves. Then everything broke. "What?" my father-in-law said, not loudly, but with the weight of stone. Andrew slammed his beer down hard enough for it to tip. "Rebecca, stop." "Why?" I asked. "Are you afraid of the truth?" Nora stood very straight, gripping Lily's hand. "He told me he was divorced," she said, her voice shaking but clear enough for everyone to hear. "He told me the marriage ended years ago. He said he only stayed tied because of money and the kids." My mother-in-law dropped into her chair. My sister stood up so quickly her seat scraped. Andrew looked at Nora, as if sheer force of will could erase her. "Nora, please." "No," she cut in. "No, don't say my name like I owe you softness." I turned, opened the laptop I had already connected to the small outdoor TV we'd planned to use for the game later, and hit play on the slideshow. The first slide was my family at the apple orchard. The second was Andrew holding Lily at the pumpkin patch. The third was the Hilliard Christmas stocking. The fourth was us in Michigan. The fifth was Andrew and Lily at the zoo on the exact day he told me he was in Louisville. The sixth was a daycare schedule. The seventh was the message, "Daddy will be home Thursday." The eighth was the text to Nora where he wrote, "Rebecca is just part of the old life I need to exit carefully." Each time I clicked, my backyard moved 1 step farther away from the peaceful version it had been pretending to be. "Turn that off," Andrew said, his voice stripped of all softness now. "Turn it off right now." "No," I said. "You let me live in lies for too long. Today, at least the people here deserve to know what kind of man they've been sitting beside." My mother-in-law started crying. My father-in-law stood rigid, face gray. My sister covered her mouth. My brother-in-law stepped backward like he needed space just to breathe. And then, at exactly the wrong moment, Sophie and Caleb came back out onto the patio carrying the old photo box. "Mom, we found that..." Sophie stopped in the middle of the sentence. She looked at the TV, at Lily, at her father. I have never seen innocence die that quickly. Something in my daughter's face changed in a single second. I moved before I thought. "Inside, right now." "Mom, what is that?" Sophie asked, her voice suddenly too high. Caleb grabbed my arm. "Why is that girl on the screen with Dad?" I turned to my sister. "Marcy, please, take them inside." She understood instantly. She wrapped an arm around both of them and guided them toward the house. Sophie looked back over her shoulder one last time, her eyes fixed on her father. I will carry that look for the rest of my life. And in the backyard, Andrew finally lost the last of the role he'd been performing. "This is not what it looks like," he said, and the stupidity of that sentence actually made me laugh out loud. "Then tell me what it looks like," I said, "because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you had a second family." Nora turned toward him, tears standing in her eyes. "Tell them about Lily's inhaler. Tell them about the townhouse. Tell them about the zoo membership in your name. Tell them about the crib you put together at 2 in the morning when she was born." Andrew looked around like a man searching for a door that didn't exist. "I was trying to fix it," he stammered. "Fix what?" I asked. "Your scheduling problem." My father-in-law spoke next, his voice low and heavy enough to silence everyone. "You have another child, Andrew didn't answer, but that silence was as clear a confession as anything he could have said. My mother-in-law started crying harder. "Andrew," she said, saying his name like a mother still hoping the right tone could undo reality. But nothing could. Nora bent and lifted Lily into her arms. The little girl didn't understand any of it. She just wrapped herself around her mother's neck and asked, "Mommy, why are people yelling?" I had to look away because my chest hurt so badly I thought I might be sick. There is a cruelty that goes far beyond adultery, and it is dragging children into ruins they never chose. In the end, it was Andrew himself who said the final thing. Not because he was brave, because there was nowhere left to go. "She's mine," he said, staring down at the grass. "Lily is mine." I don't know if I've ever heard a worse sound in my life. It didn't shock me anymore, but it made everything permanent. My father-in-law turned away completely. My mother-in-law cried in her chair like someone had pulled the bones out of her body. My sister stepped back out onto the patio, blocking Sophie and Caleb from coming back. Nora looked at me, her face chalk white. No one in that scene. Not me. Not her. We were just the last two women left standing in the light, with the same monster finally visible. Nora left first. At the gate, she turned back once and looked directly at Andrew. "Don't call me," she said. "Don't show up. Don't send flowers. Don't send explanations. You do not get to walk in and out of her life because it fits your schedule." Then she carried Lily to the car and drove away. Everything left behind after that was the heaviest part of the truth. No more music, no more trustworthy smell of grilled meat, no more adults holding paper plates and chatting about football. Just wreckage. I turned to Andrew. "You leave the house tonight. Rebecca, please." "No, not today. Not right now. You don't get to ask me for anything today." My mother-in-law lifted her head and looked at her son with a face I don't think I'll ever forget. It wasn't the face of an angry mother anymore. It was the face of a woman, realizing she had never really known the son she raised. "Go," she whispered. "Just go." Andrew looked from me to his parents, then toward the house where his children were crying somewhere inside. And for the first time in all of this, he seemed smaller. Not because I pitied him, because all his roles had finally fallen off at once. That night, I let Sophie sleep in my bed. Caleb cried himself to sleep on the couch downstairs. I turned off every light in the house, except the one over the kitchen sink. I sat at the table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of me. The house was so quiet I could hear the ice maker in the refrigerator. And for the first time since I found the phone, I finally cried. Not pretty tears, not movie tears, the kind that fold your back inward, lock your chest tight, break your breathing into pieces, and make you hold on to yourself so you don't come apart. I cried for my marriage, for the dinners, the holidays, the vacations, the dinosaur pancakes, the years I believed. I cried for Sophie and Caleb. I cried for Lily. I cried for the woman who had sat across from me in Panera. And I cried for the version of myself who had once believed, "Our home is safe." The weeks after that were the administrative wreckage of a heart split in two. Lawyers, accounts, custody, evidence, temporary division of assets. Andrew called, texted, emailed. At first he apologized, then he explained, then he shifted into that maddening language of self-soothing. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I remember staring at that sentence on my phone and almost laughing. 4 years, a child, a townhouse, 2 sets of bills, 2 Christmas trees, 2 pediatrician schedules, and he still wanted to call it something that had gotten out of hand. What made me sick wasn't only the betrayal, it was how easily he used language to comfort himself inside. In one meeting with Andrea, Andrew cried. Really cried. He said he didn't know how to get out once it had gone too far. He said he had never stopped loving me. He said every time he tried to leave the other side, he saw Lily and couldn't do it. He said he knew how horrible that sounded. I sat across from him and realized the thing left inside me was no longer hot anger. It was a hard, dry exhaustion. The worst part, I told him, is not that you slept with someone else. The worst part is that you let me live inside an edited version of my own life. You turned me into the woman who cared for this house, for your children, for your parents, while you lived another life 40 minutes away. Andrew dropped his head, shoulders shaking. I looked at the man who used to be home to me and saw no satisfaction in his tears, only a patch of ground where a house had once stood, and now there was only ash. Nora cut him off too. I know because one day she texted me a single line. He doesn't get to keep being a father only when it flatters him. I stared at that message for a long time, then replied, Good. After that, we slowly spoke less. Not because we hated each other, because we both had to keep walking in different directions. Pain can make two people cling to each other for a while. Healing usually requires solitude. Andrew lost almost everything. He lost me. He lost Sophie and Caleb in the way no custody order can ever fully describe. Sophie refused to answer his texts for nearly 3 months. Caleb started asking, "Is Dad still my dad if he has another kid in another house?" In the voice of a child too young to know how deep his own questions cut. He lost Nora. He lost Lily in a way even worse than distance. He had to live knowing he was the one who built the chaos she would grow up inside. He lost his parents too. My father-in-law didn't speak to him for half a year. My mother-in-law did, but in a voice that never sounded like a mother's again. That Thanksgiving, they did not invite Andrew. That first Christmas after everything, he spent it alone in a short-term rental near Easton, while the rest of the family had prime rib at my mother-in-law's house without saying his name. People always think the worst punishment for a betrayer is public humiliation. I don't. The worst punishment is being forced to live with your own real face, once no one around you loves you enough to keep pretending you're still the man you said you were. For a long time, I woke up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing like I was running for my life. Some days I functioned almost normally. I went to work, picked up the kids, bought milk, answered emails, watched stupid sitcoms while folding laundry, and then suddenly, the smell of aftershave on a stranger in the pharmacy aisle, or the sound of a little child in a parking lot yelling, "Daddy," would tighten my throat so hard I couldn't breathe right. I started therapy every Thursday at 4. After leaving the school office, I drove to see a therapist named Dana. She was in her 50s, wore thin-framed glasses, and spoke gently but clearly, never once offering nonsense like everything happens for a reason. In our first session, she asked what hurt the most. I thought I would say the phone, or Father's Day, or the other child, but what I actually said was that he let me live in lies long enough that I don't know which memories are still clean. Dana nodded. That's the deepest kind of betrayal, she said. It doesn't only take the present, it reaches back and dirties the past too. And that was exactly right. Since the day I found out, every memory had shifted. The trip to Michigan 3 years earlier, when Andrew stepped outside for a 40-minute client call on the balcony, meant something different now. Caleb's 9th birthday, when he said he had to stop in Indianapolis that morning, turned into another black hole. A Christmas picture of all 4 of us in front of the fireplace suddenly held a question inside it. What did he text Nora right after this was taken? There were days I hated myself for still remembering the man I had loved. Days I hated Andrew for making even the gentleness I once felt toward my own past feel contaminated. But little by little, quietly, I began to understand something. The truth can kill an illusion, but it can also save you from dying slowly inside one. I changed the locks, replaced the couch, painted the bedroom a lighter color, threw away the desk lamp Andrew bought at Target the year we moved in. Not because I believed in cleansing energy, just because I didn't want every object in the house testifying to a life that had already died. Sophie slowly started laughing again. Caleb stopped asking about the other house. I started letting the kids stay up late on Fridays so we could watch movies together in the living room, because I wanted them to know a home could still be home even if the man they once thought was the center of it was gone. That December, I drove the kids through the Christmas lights near uptown Westerville. Car crawled past houses glowing with reindeer, oversized LED ornaments, and the kind of spectacular over-decorating Americans somehow adore. Sophie leaned her head against the window. Caleb sat in the back holding a hot cocoa in both hands. Then Sophie turned to me and said very softly, "I think our house is still okay, Mom." I didn't answer right away. I just reached back and squeezed her hand and stared at the lights reflecting on the windshield until my eyes burned. That night after they were asleep, I cried again. But it was a different kind of crying. Lighter, cleaner, like water in a jar, finally beginning to settle after the storm. About a year later, on a gray afternoon in early November, I drove past the same Panera where I first met Nora. I didn't go inside. I just looked at the green sign from the road, watched people come and go with hot soup in their hands, leaves skittering across the parking lot, and realized I didn't feel sick anymore. Not because I had forgotten. I never will, but because the memory no longer owned me. If you ask me now what the most painful part of this story was, I still wouldn't say the affair. People always think betrayal is about bodies. For me, the worst part was that a man could look into my eyes every day, mow the lawn, carry sleeping children inside, argue with me over repair bills, kiss me before work, tell our kids good night, while secretly building another life, another dinner table, another Christmas tree, another little girl. The worst part was that I truly believed I was living inside the full version of my life, when in fact I was only half. But if you ask me what the strongest thing left behind is, I'll tell you this. The truth. The truth didn't give me my marriage back. It didn't return the innocence that died. It didn't make the beautiful memories clean again. But it dragged me out of a burning house I had been sitting inside for too long, telling myself the smoke was probably my imagination. And sometimes, being pulled out of the wreckage is all a person needs to begin again. My name is Rebecca. I used to think I had a busy husband and a marriage that was just going through a tired season. The truth is, I had a husband with 2 phones, 2 addresses, 2 stories, and 2 families. In the end, he lost them both. And I, even after losing more than I ever thought I could survive, kept the one thing that mattered most: myself.